Hi and welcome to South Carolina State Museum Resources for Educators. Today we're looking at an art exhibit, Abstract Art in South Carolina, 1949 to 2012. This art exhibit has some wonderful pieces, primarily paintings, and we'll be talking to Paul Matheny. He's our curator of art and also going into some of the studios where this art was created. This exhibit's only open this spring until August 26th, so this is a great time to come and see it. So we're here in the Lipscomb Art Gallery, and this is where the abstract show is. If you've been in the museum, you've possibly missed this gallery. A lot of times folks come in and they're ushered off to another floor via the elevator here on the first floor. So this is one you don't want to miss. This abstract show is really amazing, and we have Chief Curator of Art Paul Matheny here with us today. And Paul's going to talk a little bit about how we use the gallery and what this show's about.
Thanks, Tom. It's good to be here today. And the Lipscomb Art Gallery always focuses on South Carolina art. And the way the art department includes that is from 1590 to the present. The abstract art exhibit is a small portion of that. We are focusing on art made in South Carolina from 1949 to 2012. So it includes current work and also some historical contemporary art from across the state. A couple of artists that we are looking at, some of the earliest artists, are William Halsey and Corey McCallum, both from Charleston, South Carolina. They're two of the earliest contemporary art pioneers, so to speak, that are in this exhibition. And we're going to look at a conversation with artists that was done in 1988 with both of these artists that are no longer living in South Carolina.
From the time I started painting when I was like 12 or 13 years old, and the things that always interested me, and even very early paintings of mine, I still have a couple of paintings that I did when I was like 15, and they were not totally abstract, but the things that I was always most intrigued with were color and design. My training was very traditional. I mean, I drew and painted from the model. I took perspective. I learned how to draw things the way they look. But that wasn't really what I wanted to do. I mean, I always felt, I think, that if you were going to be an artist, that the basic reason for doing this was to express your own viewpoint or your own ideas, to do something that was individual and personal. Color is my thing. I mean, I think if I'm any good at anything at all, it's color. But color is the thing that I really have more and more become obsessed with. And I work very hard. I've gone through all kinds of things, trying to find ways to make the color rich and alive. I mean, what I try and do, I don't use bright colors necessarily, bright surface colors, but what I'm after always is to have the painting have a feeling of almost of light coming from inside it, that the color is luminous, the color is transparent, so even if it's dark, it glows out at you. I work over and over and over. I mean, people have no idea how many layers of underpainting, how long I work on them to try and get this color quality. It doesn't work all the time. I mean, I destroy lots of paintings. I recycle paintings.
I think it's more of a free expressionistic way of working. I don't seem to have a particular style in the sense of liking to do one thing in the same way as some painters do, and a limited palette that some painters are happy with for years. I like to change a lot and move from thing to thing. If you saw my work, I think you'd recognize it because of probably a certain feeling for nature that comes through it, and a certain sort of perhaps a rhythm that's characteristic of me. I like a lot of flow and movement and curves. When I'm painting, the first thing I usually do, I have a talk with myself and I say, Kari, how are you feeling today? Are you feeling big, bold, dynamic? Or are you feeling kind of small? Are you feeling really like you want to go for it, or you're tentative. And then this is a subconscious discussion I have with me. And then I think, what color is interesting to you today? And sometimes one color cries out, got to use blue, or I'm tired of blues, I've got to have some orange and golds and reds. I seldom use neutrals because I don't react that much to neutrals in life or in color. Once you get into it, it's so exciting. And once you get into a painting, it begins to tell you what it wants to be. And it sort of directs you, and all you have to do is know the signals, which isn't easy. That's where the trick is. You have to feel which way it wants to go and not try to block it, but to move with the direction of the color that it wants to change to. You may think you want to start out with a somber painting, and it may suddenly get lighter and lighter, and then you realize your mood has changed. The painting has a life of its own, and it wants to sing another song. And so it's a combination of being in control and being in tune with your inner self. I think life and art are so much the same.
You know, Corey McCallum and William Halsey really have been a big part of South Carolina's art history, and certainly a big part of our galleries in the past as well.
Absolutely. We did a whole show focusing just on their work a couple of years ago, and so it's good to have some of those pieces in the gallery as well as some additional pieces that haven't been seen before.
Right, yeah, that's what's really nice is there are some new pieces here that people have never seen, and a lot of borrowed stuff that people have never seen before.
Absolutely. The work in this show came from all over the place. Some of it's from our collection, some of it's from artists. In fact, a couple made some just for this particular exhibition. Other work comes from other museums, and some universities loaned some stuff to us. But we also borrowed stuff from artists, like this particular piece by Mike Williams.
So Mike Williams, totally different. I mean, this is a different looking piece of art, obviously, from what you've just been looking at. And just, you know, we're going to learn a little bit more. Just describe his process a little bit, Paul.
Sure. Mike Williams is really probably known by most people for the paintings that he does that incorporate fish. He's an avid fisherman. He's really interested in nature and water. So these are particularly different for him. These are completely non-representational works of art. They don't really reference any particular living creature or the landscape necessarily, although they do have aspects of the landscape in this work. We had a chance to meet with Mike Williams here in his studio in Columbia, South Carolina, to see kind of what his thought process was like and how he creates these really incredible paintings. Today we're in the studio with artist Mike Williams, who's in the current exhibition at the South Carolina State Museum, Abstract Art in South Carolina from 1949 to 2012. How you doing today, Mike?
Doing well, thanks.
Good. It's good to be here. A lot of people might recognize your work from the past. A lot of times you incorporate fish and nature and landscapes and swamps and things. But the pieces that are in this show are a little bit different. How did these particular pieces evolve?
Well, I think that they are different. While they're different, they represent a part of my work that the process and the creation of an image through mark making and painting, which is equally important to me in art making. So when one of the pieces entitled At the Core is a distilled version of a swampy landscape. While it is very sort of minimal in some respects and very abstract, it still is a foggy, atmospheric, mysterious sort of landscape created through a variety of mark making.
Are you actually in the swamp or in the landscape when you're creating those paintings?
I worked on it solely in the studio. I prefer to base my work on 30 years of outdoor experiences and the time spent outdoors, absorbing nature and interacting with nature. And then I prefer to paint in a studio setting where I have all the tools that I need, and I generally work from memory. I begin a painting usually in a different way or different fashion each time I make a painting, and paint towards this evocative image that is familiar, that is the place that I want it to be.
So So that painting really has the feeling of the swamp, sort of the aesthetic of the swamp and the light and the color playing off the trees. One of the things you like to do outdoors is fish, is that correct?
Right. My primary purpose for being outdoors is fishing or sometimes hunting, but I've enjoyed fishing. It has been great pastime and hobby, I suppose, for most of my life. So I've spent the majority of the time outdoors pursuing that.
So being outdoors and fishing and being in nature really sort of feeds the creative process and feeds your imagination. But figure with fish, there's also a figurative element in that painting as well, is that correct?
It's one of a number of pieces that really began with some sculptures that I had been doing that felt like figures, more like human type figures as opposed to fish figures, but it's still nature, and I think I began drawing sketches and painting some figurative pieces, more human-like figures, after making some out of sculpture, and they're stylized in a way that made them very simple. So the figurative paint, the figure with fish, is a figure that is really drafted through paint. It's drafted through the application of paint, and the figures is very sketchy in the painting, so you mostly see a large white or light area and a very dark area in the corner that defines this figure. And within the figure there are several fish that are drawn, that were edited back or painted out to some degree, but they're within that fish, that figure. The figure embodies the fish, and it, while it's not, I wouldn't say, an autobiographical painting, it is representative of one who is at one with fish.
So when you're painting on a canvas and you're painting fish and you're adding these elements to the canvas, part of the creative process is not only adding things but also taking things away, and sometimes the fish are removed from the surface or painted over. So you really have to pay close attention to how the painting's evolving.
Paintings go through many incarnations during the process of creating them, and often it's not uncommon in my work for a landscape painting to become a painting of fish, or vice versa. It depends on how I feel about what's happening on a given day, or how well the work is going. It's often it's a struggle to find what the work wants to be. You have to you know, it's an activity that you engage in, the activity of creating art or making a painting or making a sculpture. So it's not something that's, with me, it's not preconceived. I don't have an idea in my head to begin with about what the final product is going to be. It is a make a mark and respond to that mark, or paint it white and then respond to that. Draw something in red, draw something in black, pick up a piece of charcoal and draw on it with charcoal, draw a fish, paint the fish out. That kind of back and forth process is what I'm speaking about.
So how did the process of becoming an artist start for you?
It began in childhood, I guess. I spent a lot of time drawing and sketching dogs and dinosaurs from the encyclopedia. It was a pastime that I enjoyed, so I spent a good deal of time doing that. I didn't think of myself as being an artist one day. I just was enjoying myself drawing and continued to do that.
Well, thanks so much for your time today, Mike. It's been great to visit you in your studio, and thanks for being a part of this exhibition.
Well, it's an honor to have you, and I thank you for coming, and I'm delighted to be in the exhibition.
Paul, that really looked like a great visit.
Yeah, it's always great to get out of the office and out of the gallery into an artist's studio to see what they're working on.
Well, we're talking about another artist now, and we're talking about Brian Rutenberg, and you can see some of his work right behind us.
That's right. Brian grew up in Myrtle Beach, and then he went to the College of Charleston, and he studied with William Halsey for about a semester, I believe. And now he's in New York, He paints full-time, and you can see a little bit of a difference with his work. It's very textural. There's a lot of movement and a different use of color than some of the other art that we've been looking at.
So we're going to get a chance to look at something, I think that's out on Artopia, which is part of ETV's web presence for education. So this is Brian Rutenberg talking more about his art.
I love the way that lines can have different speeds in a painting. A much fatter one that's kind of broken up tends to be a lot slower and more meandering like this, next to one that's much more like a rip through it, which is much faster. So again, that goes back to the idea of the painter being in control of the way that the viewer experiences the picture. Not only the medium, but the mark, and these are very much about mark. It would never be any fun if I knew where it was going to end up. I have just a general idea of a mood or a palette that I might work with, or an image. In this case, again, it's kind of a lot of them will repeat some of the same images again, and I'll just go over that and through it and then investigate it and turn it into something else. But I like the fact that every day it leads me where it needs to go. And the more you paint, the more you understand that you have to kind of do what it tells you to do. So I'll come in here and I listen to music or talk radio as I work all day, and I just kind of, it zones out, it kind of creates white noise, and that's the perfect environment for me to work in. And you don't really have to think too much. You want to just work and let it come out. I've been doing it long enough to trust my eye and my hand. But it's fun because, you know, like sometimes a news program will come on and it'll talk about a certain subject, and I'll know when I look at this painting in 10 years, I'll be able to remember exactly what that program was by a certain mark. You know? I'm always interested in the relationship between sound and image, which is really nothing new. A lot of artists explore that. But again, colors can, in my mind, create sounds. Just as sometimes I can see passages in music, images and shapes. That crossover of the senses, I think, is really interesting. The role of a studio in an artist's life is very, very important, as I'm sure all artists would tell you. It really looks disorderly, but I do know where everything is. And I have several palettes I work on, and I mix different families of colors on different palettes. You can see this had a lot of red on it at one point. These are recently very gold-green colors, and some of the cooler colors here. And these have been, I like when they have a bit of age on them. They're quite thick, and you can see they're even concave from all the scraping, and they're really heavy as well. And paint usually gets used, and then when it's not, scraped up and put into these piles, so I get these great shapes here. And I do use several palettes at once, and I usually divide them into color groups, warms and cools. That's how I like to organize color. Oil paint, it dries slower than acrylic does, so it lets you work it a little longer. It's also, I think the range of colors is richer and more saturated and more sensual, I think, in oil paint. And these are the mediums, and there's all sorts of textures from really viscous and gel-like to much thinner. This is walnut oil. And different ones have different properties. Some are more shiny, some are more matte. And the great thing about the artist is we have so many tools available to us, we can be in constant control of what the effect is going to be. When a viewer looks at something that's shiny, it's a much different effect than when it's flat and matte. These are pure saturated colors. Sometimes I will use them right out like that. That's at full saturation, the cadmium yellow medium. Permanent green. What I thought I was going to do is maybe mix up a little bit of gray. And I'll take an alizarin crimson, a little phthalo green, and then I'll start to work titanium white, which is the whitest white, down into it. You can see it's kind of a deep burgundy gray, and you can work it more into the cold family like that, bluer. Then what I'll often do, once I get an interesting neutral color like this, I'll start to pull over a more saturated color, mingle them together. And now it starts to get a little more complex, the relationship. I took a cool color and made a warm color cooler by adding the gray. I live for color. I see it everywhere. I observe color everywhere. People's clothes, leaves, television, products, and shelves. You know, and I have emotional responses to color as well. Then once I have an interesting range of colors that I know I'm going to work with, I'll start to bring in brushes and other tools and work them right into the painting.
So Rutenberg really is one of the more famous artists in South Carolina, but there are a lot of famous artists.
Absolutely. Brian Rutenberg is one of the most well-known artists because of his success in New York at the galleries up there. But there are also other artists that still live in South Carolina that exhibit regularly all across the United States. And we have their work represented in this exhibit as well. The show focuses on 63 years of abstract in South Carolina. There are about 90 works of art here by 44 different artists. So it's a great sort of survey of what's happened over the last 63 years in this component of South Carolina's art history.
And what's great is, you know, you talk about art, a lot of times we think art is something that happened in the past, kind of like history did, but there are a lot of modern living artists and people who recently graduated from school, and schools all around South Carolina represented right here.
Absolutely. There are a lot of different college and university art professors that are included in this show, as well as artists that are just active in their community and own their own and operate their own studios.
So I think when you think about this and you think about all of the folks who we had to go talk to, I know you visited a lot of artists and you visited a lot of other places, other museums and universities. What is that like to go out in the community and talk to all those folks?
Yeah, it's always great to be out in the community, doing studio visits, talking to artists, because they're constantly making work in their studio. So there's always something new every time you go. You're familiar with their style, you're familiar with what they do and how they make their work, but there's always something new around the corner. So it's good to be out in the studio, seeing what they're working on today, and also being in the museums that are around the state, going through their vaults and their storage rooms to kind of take a look at what they have stored away in their collection that we can pull out and they so generously loan to the exhibits that we do here.
And you know, not only are they loaning, but they also are exhibiting at some of these museums all around the state. So if you can't make it to the State Museum and see abstract this year, obviously it's great to go to another museum in another part of the state and be able to look at some of these. And of course, universities that have their own galleries.
Absolutely. A lot of universities all over the state have their own exhibit spaces within there so that the students can learn from the artists that come in, the visiting artists, and see the work that they're producing on a regular basis as well.
Well, we obviously hope that you can make it here to the State Museum. Remember, you can always call us at 898-4999. That's our group visits number. You can email us at groupvisits@scmuseum.org. And then you can go ahead and you can actually book a lesson and walk through this gallery and learn more about abstract art. Remember to join us next month. We look at environmental programs in South Carolina and things you can do right here at the South Carolina State Museum.